It's 2:06. I'd like to call to order the King County Finance and Budget Committee special meeting on Wednesday, June 12th. Have a roll call, please.
Juby,
Juby here.
Lewis,
Lewis here, remote.
Sanchez,
Sanchez present.
Surges, Tepe,
Tepe here.
Leonard, Pirog, Berman.
Berman's here.
In-person quorum?
The remote attendance request by Mr. Sanchez, Ms. Lewis, and Mr. Surges. I think Surges may not make it, but do we have approval to have them via Zoom? Hearing that, we will approve that.
Thank you.
Point of order, Mr. Chair, just
Yes.
want to note that our chairwoman is here to make an in-house quorum for us.
Very good. Thank you. Approval of minutes. We have none. Public comments. I don't know of any. Either agenda or non-agenda. And under new business is a discussion on budget cuts approach. Now, I've put together a suggested discussion, and I'm sure we're gonna have all kinds of questions for our finance director. But the main thing to me is, starting out, is that are we talking about budget cuts for the 2025 budget? Are we too far along in that program to even think about cutting the budget for this next year? You know, I want feedback from everyone. It's my feeling that we are too far along in the 2025 budget to start cutting at this point in time. But Juby,
Well, I had remembered that we had had some conversations about using reserves for this budget, but that this whole idea of where we were going to make the cuts was going to be hand in hand with the retail sales tax conversation, and then that kind of got put aside and this came. So my assumption, which is never a good thing, is that this was for the 26th and on.
very good.
But I might be misremembering, or I might have misunderstood.
No, I think I wanted to get to a common understanding of it, basically. Ms. Tepe.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I think it's, when I did a presentation a few months ago for this committee and pointed out the financial cliff that we're headed for, I thought I made it pretty plain that we need to look at budgets cut for 2025. And we need to start establishing a methodology, because if we continue on the road that we've been going on and continuing to increase our expenses, when we then start talking about 2026, we will be in a crisis mode. So in my opinion, we need to start looking at budget cuts for this upcoming year. And I don't think it's too late.
Well, I don't agree with you, because I don't think the board is really at this point can go forward with cuts. I could be wrong, and we can go with that approach. The next question, the next thing is that online, any comments from Lewis, Sanchez?
So
All right, I think that,
okay, so this is Lewis. Can you hear me now?
yes. Lewis?
Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Thank you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh,
We
okay.
hear you,
Okay, and now I can hear you too. So, yeah, I was under the assumption that we would be looking at budget cuts this year, because even though the departments have been working on it, we have not seen them yet. And I was also a little disturbed by what Kathy had sent us today about how several of these elected officials have come in with higher budgets than we even, allowed them as far as the head count. So I think we definitely have to take a look at it starting this year.
I think that, the board is somewhat committed to, use of reserves. I think that the next question is, what is the feeling of the committee as far as the use of our reserves? We've come to that the last couple of years, even though that, and we're scheduled to do that for this year. Do we as a board want to continue or to use reserves rather than cut?
Mr. Chairman, this is Alan.
Yes, Alan.
I'm not on your committee, but I wanted to just toss into the mix. Can you add to the discussion the possibility of adding a sales tax on perhaps the consolidated election in 2025? And I think we should always be talking about when we can add a CPI. A CPI is how governments are allowed to cover the cost of union contracts that go up every year, and Microsoft licensing, which goes up every year, and the cost of things like paper that go up every year, and the fact that you want to be able to pay your people so you can keep them who are not covered by union contracts. Thanks for letting me vent.
Well, I think, and I agree with you, I think that historically, though, we haven't been able to support that. Mr. Sanchez has his hand up. Mr. Sanchez?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess just from running other meetings, I've learned it's helpful sometimes just have a sort of initial draft of ideas to start with the conversation. And it just seems like we're just coming up with that right now. I guess it's kind of hard in my mind to separate this conversation of budget cuts from the overall revenue problem that we have. As far as I can tell, given the projections that we've been shown year after year, we're going to run out of money eventually. We have to find more revenue. No matter what budget cuts we discover, it's not going to be enough to close the gap. I could be wrong on that, but as far as I can tell, that's been the writing on the wall for many years now. So as far as just looking at only budget cuts and not looking at the revenue side of things, I would suggest then we would want to have a sort of strategic approach and determine, well, how much do we actually need to cut? And I believe when it was, spitballed, it was somewhere around 10% across the board if we were to do it that way, in order to avoid using reserves to fill our budget up. How much do we actually need to cut if we were going to avoid using reserves? And then let's come up with a plan of an approach to find out, well, how close can we get to that number without having issues with other departments and officials? Maybe we can get up to 5% budget cuts across the board, or at least in certain departments or offices where it really would make an impact.
Well, that's for us to determine at this meeting, I think, to come up with those ideas and with information from Kathy. Ms. Juby.
This is weird. Like I get to talk so much. So my first thing is I thought I recalled the rest of our board when we were together saying they wanted to spend down the excess reserves before they would consider anything else. So I thought that's why we were on target for the 26-27 budget. Also, when you talk about an across the board spending, when you put a percentage on it, that penalizes some departments more than others. And my suggestion would be that if we're looking to replace, let's just say 18 million, whatever the number is that we would have a shortfall, that we look at the percentage that each department takes of that money, and that's what they're asked to cut out. So if there is a department or a office that is 27% of our budget, then they should be responsible for cutting out 27% of whatever that is, because that I can justify to somebody, but I can't justify to somebody who has a very, very tiny budget why they have to do 5%, because $10 to one person isn't the same as $10 to another.
Thank you. And I think that goes on to maybe our online people don't have this suggested discussion for our budget cuts that the rest of us have in front of us. But the next one was, I do though feel as a committee that we definitely do not want to recommend to the board that we continue to use our reserves. Is that what we would like to present to the board?
Well, Mr. Chair, Sanchez, if I might.
Yes,
I think that is essentially what the board desires at this point.
I'm asking the committee because we're the ones going to make a recommendation to the board as to what it is.
So then to me, it's sort of a decision tree. If we're going to recommend that we don't use any of our fund balance, then we have to formulate a plan that's going to achieve that. We're going to have people that are going to take up certain assignments to work with various elected officials and department heads to see where cuts can be made reasonably. You know, where are people able to do that without pain, and then see how close we can get to that figure. I don't know that we'll be able to accomplish that on 100%, but I think that is at least part of the point, is that we get as close to that as we can, and make that effort. And again, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems the projections and all the things we have been looking at for years are showing us that we should do that, but it's not going to be enough entirely. So we still are going to have that conversation on the revenue side of things.
So I think if the board decides we want to use our reserves, there's probably a moot question as to whether we want to cut or not cut. Yes, at least for the immediate future. Ms. Dewey.
So in my previous 12 years of doing budgets for another taxing body, we were told that any money you have over your reserve, your common sense best practice reserve, is money that you either should spend down or return because it's more money than what you need. And I still have that feeling that if we have money in excess of our 90-day reserves, we need to spend that down one way or another. And I think that is kind of what I heard from the full board that we wanted to do. Now, if people want to do it differently, that's okay. But I think if you're sitting with a percentage of money over a 90-day best practice, I think that you're probably not being a good steward to the taxpayers.
All right, Ms. Tepe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First off, we have a decent amount of money in reserves. I don't think there's any doubt in anybody's mind that we're going to have to use some of that in fiscal year 2025. So we're going to have to spend down part of it. Second, a key thing that is being depleted is our capital fund. We virtually have not really made any major contributions to capital fund, and the kinds of capital improvements that are being done are being augmented at least this year by ARPA funds fairly substantially. So if we're going to have any kind of a building program, we're going to have to find some way to fund that. When I put on my presentation a few months ago, I came up with and this is kind of a summary, but I came up with a $15 million gap, pretty much on an average annual basis between our revenues and our expenditures. There are a couple of ways that we can begin to change that particular gap. We can begin to use the annual PTEL increases, which would average about $2 million a year. If we did the PTEL increase, which I believe is 3.5% this year. Kathy, am I right with that? Okay. Second is we could increase the gas tax, which would go to KDOT, and reallocate the RTA tax, which would give us $6.3 million. Those are things that we could do right now as a board. Okay. Then we could talk about implementing a sales tax. I'm not sure if that's within the assignment of this committee's objectives, but we certainly should discuss it. And then the other thing is significant cuts to personnel, because that's really the only thing that we've got. And I agree with Ms. Juby that, you know, we should look and do this in a very specific manner, not just a general manner, because some of the departments are extremely small, others are extremely large. But we would also have to look at that in relationship to the elected personnel, where I think what we need to do in that area is to give them a specific number for their particular department. So those are the kinds of discussions that I think we should have to see where we're in agreement.
Well, Ms. Madam Chair,
So thank you. Just to, without talking about the sales tax, because that's an unknown quantity. We're looking at, if we follow Mr. Teppe's suggestions, that's approximately $8 million. I'm sorry, 9.8. So we have a deficit. If it's $15 million annually that we're in deficit. So we have to make up a little over $5 million. And I'm unsure if that computation is at this year's salary rate with any kind of increases. And if we're looking at next year with additional compounded increases on top of that, if we will need additional money beyond that 5 million, 6 million to bring it, to have some wiggle room so that those people who are still employed with the county will be able to maintain their integrity with their wages. So $6 million approximately budget cut.
so we're talking,
Perhaps, I mean, it's very rough, obviously very rough, but.
well, that's assuming that we want to take advantage of those opportunities that we have to increase our revenue.
Correct.
Okay. If we take advantage of those, then we're looking at a $6 million deficit, supposedly or theoretically at this point in time. I guess the question is that, what is our goal then? Is it $6 million? And obviously, we all know that 70% of our expenditures is for salaries. So we haven't seen the dollars that other than salaries we're going to be able to get anywhere close to $6 million. So therefore, you know, this budget cut is going to be a percentage over all departments? Is it going to be a individual by department that we determine with their assistance?
Again, Mr. Chair, I think that would be a budget, an overall budget cut, I think would be wrong. I think
Okay.
we need to target it and look at it either by department or with certain smaller departments. We should group them together. As in my private discussions with Mrs. Hopkins, we could use that for some smaller departments headquartered here at this location. But the key thing is we've got to look at budget cuts. And if we don't, we're just going to make the problem even worse the following year. So if we don't start this year with the 2025 budget, we're just putting ourselves into a deeper hole. But we can also do it by increasing revenues, which is fully within the capability of this board to do that without having to go to referendum.
Agreed. They've been rather reluctant to do that in the past, though.
Well, everybody's afraid. You know, you've got to stand up and say, wait a minute, let's try to do the right thing,
Okay,
regardless of whether or not you're going to get reelected.
okay.
So,
Well, the other, you know, before we talk about the actual cuts, I think there are some things we talk about capital, and there's not that much budgeted for capital for 25 or into the future. I don't know, what are we talking? $3 million that we budgeted for capital this year?
That's not correct.
Oh, I don't know.
We haven't presented a draft of the 2025 budget yet. Are you talking for 2024? The capital projects fund has upwards of, it's approximately $10 million budgeted. But I think as Roger Fonstock mentioned this morning at the admin committee, a significant number of the projects that were in the 2024 capital projects budget are going to be funded by ARPA funds. So some of that money that was already, some of the cash that was already in the capital projects fund is still going to be there. Now, there's a 5-year capital projects plan, of course, that has many millions each year. So the money in that fund wouldn't be able to cover all 5 years of the planned capital projects plan, obviously.
That is a significant number that we would have to consider when we're talking about cuts. That plus other projects that we have.
Can I mention one of
Yes,
a couple
yeah.
other things? So the strategic plan, which is, I've been asked to bring a resolution at the finance committee in a couple of weeks, the regularly scheduled finance committee. I would think going through the process of developing a strategic plan would be beneficial to identifying how resources can be allocated across the county and would assist in the budgeting from a policy maker, the board as policymaker standpoint. That would be very helpful.
Our priorities are, it would define our priorities as a board, and that strategic plan is going to include outreach to our community, isn't it?
That would be the plan. Yes.
Good, good, good. So that indeed, that would be helpful. But to Mr. Teppe's point, I still have the microphone. The strategic plan is going to be over the course of a period of time, perhaps ready for next year or late this year after the budget is passed. And that fiscal cliff just grew a little bit higher.
Right. A strategic plan, like we're talking about, is probably something that takes minimum 6 months, minimum, probably more like a year.
Yeah.
A good one, yes.
Yeah.
It does take time. So it is 26, but are we to suggest priorities? But we still have, we have limited resources to back up the growth.
Well, we were looking at what that goal was. What did we say? 6 million was what we were going to cut. So Kathy, if we were to take the 6 million out of our proposed budget, let's not say 25, but let's say the 26 budget is going to be similar to the 25 budget. We're going to take 6 million out of it. Where would we get that $6 million?
Well, one other thing, I know I talk a lot about the general fund because it's the single largest operating fund in the county and has most of the county employees, but we have other funds across the county that are operating at a deficit. Our IMRF fund is using fund balance this year for the 2024 budget. The FICA, I think I sent an email out to the board probably last month. The health department fund, probably about 25% of the health department's 2024 budgeted expenditures are being funded by fund balance. So the general fund by far is the largest fund that is running on reserves, but it's not the only fund. Also, just some background. I've talked a lot about over budgeting before and trying to get better precision with budgeting. So the 2023 budget that the county put together for the general fund budgeted a $17 million use of fund balance reserves. We're just finishing up putting our audit report together, and the actual loss, it's still a loss, was $5.5 million. So my guess is for 2024, it'll obviously be a higher loss because we've had equity adjustments and significant increases in some of our union contracted rates. But yeah, the 2023 loss wasn't as bad, but it was still a loss. So we're beginning the eating away of our reserves. So in answer to your question about 6 million, if we were to move money around, as Mr. Tuppy suggested, perhaps moving some money from the RTA Public Safety or RTA Sales Tax Fund in the Transportation Department over to the general fund and increase local motor fuel tax in the Transportation Department. That would provide about $6 million, $7 million. That would be obviously beneficial to the general fund. But our 2024 budget, we're budgeting $10 million in reserves. So I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Well,
Mr. Chair.
yes, Ms. Juby.
Just in my opinion, I think it's not prudent of us to be planning cuts or budgets on two forms of revenue that we have consistently not had the votes for. I still do not believe we have the votes for either one of those. So if we're going to make this a valuable use of our time, I suggest we go on the facts that we know, that we do not have the CPI to capture, and we are not going to be changing our gas tax, and we should work accordingly. And if at the end of this thing, we find out that's wrong, yay. We're only 5 million instead of 11 million. But to do all this work for something that we know we do not have the votes for, because I can count and we did not have the votes, and I don't see anything changing coming up to an election year. I, for one, don't care if I get reelected. Obviously, you can see it in my votes, but some people do care. And so I think that would be a huge mistake. And I also want to weigh in that I think an across the board cut is not only a huge mistake, but I think it's punitive, and I wouldn't be able to support that either. So I stick by my, however much of the budget you use is how much of a percentage you should have to locate. And I don't care where they located. It doesn't necessarily have to be people. It's not up to me to tell them where to find their cuts. It's just, this is what your percentage of cuts is, figure it out. And if they want to cut people or services or programs or staples, that's up to them.
Well, to me, one of the things that comes from this committee for the board is when we determine what those cuts are going to be, what is the effect going to be on services that are provided by the county? And then with that in mind, how is the board going to look at those cuts as an alternative of doing what we're talking about with the gas tax and PTEL come out of another $9 million.
Well, I think we don't look at what the cuts are going to be. That's not what we're tasked to do. We're tasked to give a dollar amount. And however the department, I'm not going to micromanage a department and tell them how to spend their money. We give them their money, they go in the parameters, and that's what happens. And so if the purpose of this is for us to determine that one department is going to cut 6 people out of their budget, that's not really anything I'm interested in being part of, because I think that we are not the experts on how to run it. I think we're tasked with assigning an amount of money, and then they figure out how they want to divide that money. We don't say X amount of your money has to be salaries and X amount of your money has to be supplies. We just give them, this is how much money you have. So I guess I'm unclear on, I'm either unclear on how we operate, or I'm unclear on why we're trying to micromanage something that I don't think we should be.
Is that reality? I don't know, Mr. Tepe.
First off, I agree with Ms. Juby. We should not. I agree with Ms. Juby. We should not micromanage the departments. We should set up an amount of money associated with them, and they should make the decision on how those cuts are made. Some of them might decide to cut lower level people. Others might say, gee, we need to keep those people. We need to cut higher level people, or we need to make cuts elsewhere. Okay. But the key thing is that I think it's a mistake for us to assume that the board isn't going to be receptive to certain ideas. Okay? Part of our job is to do our job based upon the facts in front of us.
Yeah.
And come up with the recommendations that we think are right. And then to be able to justify that to the board. And, you know, the first thing we're at is, I believe we do need to do that this year. I think it would be a terrible mistake not to do that for the 2025 budget and to get started. Because if not, next year, the problem's going to be worse. So first thing we need to decide is, are we going to go ahead this year and do something for 2025 budget or not?
All right, Ms. Lewis wants to speak.
Thank you. Okay, so I agree totally with Leslie, and therefore that means Vern also. By default. So the way I, in my little simple brain, envision this is, we have our budget and we say that we want to cut 6 million. And then Kathy just does a number that says, okay, I'll say the sheriff's office, that of that 6 million, 40% of that has to come from the sheriff. So we would tell the sheriff that his 40%, you know, is $3 million, and ask him to see if he can cut 3 million. And then we go to the next one and you say, okay, your percent of the money we have to cut is, it's probably court services. And so maybe we're going to ask you to cut 1 million. And we just put those numbers out there and ask them what they can do. And then when they come back and say yes or no, then based on what they say, then we look at, well, what can we do to supplement that? And then we just simply go to the board and we say, okay, we can do X amount of dollars in budget cuts, wherever that comes from, they decide. And then we're also going to have to do the RTA tax or the gas tax, or, you know, whatever this board, this group right here feels is the right thing to do. And we present it that way to the full board. But I totally agree. This is one time where we're going to have to, like, you know, get balls and actually say, sorry, we can't have everything anymore. You know, we do it at home all the time. You know, I don't want to sound like we the people, but you know, at some point we just have to say, we don't have all the money. So, you know, let's do a combination of both. But I do think we have to look at it for this year also.
All right, Kathy?
I do want to add in terms of cutting. So as I've mentioned before, we have several funds that are operating in deficit. And I think the reason why we, myself and my predecessor, Joe Onzik before me, have suggested to the county board to look at the transportation department, is because for moving RTA sales tax dollars to the general fund, is that department has never had a problem and doesn't run on deficit. And from a strategic standpoint of the county, I think one of the things that has always fascinated me is that certain functions of the county, which have certain forms of revenue, feel the stress of budget deficits. Other county operations that don't have the negative revenue impacts that departments that are funded by our general fund revenues have, do not experience those stresses. And I think that is why historically the finance director has recommended moving some of the RTA sales tax funds, more of the RTA sales tax funds from the transportation department to the general fund. I mean, as it is right now, there's 10% of the RTA sales tax dollars in the general fund. 75% are in the transportation department. And then there's about 15% that are in some public safety and technology, public safety and judicial technology special revenue funds. So I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, well, one of the things, if we're talking about cutting in each department, are we going to say, how are we going to determine what that department cut should be? should it be on their percentage of the general fund revenue? But, you know, again, in a department that's getting most of the revenue from outside the general fund, is that department getting hit as,
No, I'm sorry.
okay,
My suggestion,
let's not.
okay, can we just have open dialogue? Okay, so my suggestion wasn't necessarily what percentage, like if it was more of a what percentage are we trying to make up? So if the shortfall is 6 million, which I hear you all the time about RTA sales funds, and I'm never going to support that. So that's why I want to go, I mean, I'm being honest about it. I'm never going to support that, never going to support a gas tax. So, you know, but if we need to make up 6 million or 10 million, then the percentage of whatever of the budget they take, if they take 46% of the budget, then we figure out 46% of 6 million or 12 million or whatever that figure is that we decide on is what they should get as their percentage. Because that is the only equitable way to make sure that everybody is feeling the same pain. In the school district, we had a visual of 3 kids standing at a fence, and all 3 kids were standing on the same size milk carton. That's not equitable, but it's equal. But you have the next graphic is 3 kids standing on 3 different size milk things, and all 3 kids could see over the fence. That's equitable. So what's right for one isn't necessarily what's right for another, but we need to make it as equitable as possible. And equitable does not mean equal.
Well, how realistic is that, Kathy?
How realistic is,
A percentage based on their revenue from the general fund?
well, again, if you're a department that is not in the general fund, then my question to the board would be, then would they be cut?
It wasn't from the general fund. If they are funded X percent, that's the percentage that they have to do. I didn't know we were just talking about the general fund. I thought we were talking about,
Right.
because you said we have deficit spending and other things. So, you know, you talk about KDOT, most of KDOT's revenue comes from outside. So yes, they would have a very small percentage, but unfortunately that's equitable. We may not like it, but it's equitable. And I think we need to stick as closely as we can, because we need to keep our personalities and our favoritism and everything out of it. And the only way to do that is by going to numbers and not.
But so Transportation Department has property tax revenue in the county highway fund, in the county bridge fund, and in the county highway matching fund. They have over $5 million in property tax revenue coming into their budgets. They have state motor fuel tax, county motor fuel tax, RTA sales tax, impact fees, federal, and some other grant revenue. But none of those funds experience deficits. And they have personnel paid out of property tax revenue, and they have personnel paid out of motor fuel tax revenue. So my question was, for a department like a KDOT, which obviously probably 70% of their budget is capital and not personnel, would the notion of cutting budgets apply to a department like a transportation department that historically doesn't have any deficit problems?
I think that's for us to decide,
Right.
you know?
That's so, but if there was a framework that said there are budget cuts applied to offices and departments across the county, would it only be to those offices and departments that are in funds where those funds have deficits?
Or would it be maybe easier to say, if they're taking money out of, if we are funding them out of reserves, that's maybe where we start. We have to start somewhere. I mean, we can't just keep going in circles. We have to start with something. So we start with that and we look in it. If it turns out that only 3 departments are going to have to change their budget, maybe we have a conversation about that and think, well, gee, that's not fair. Or maybe we're like, well, yeah, that like makes total sense. But until we step into the water, like Vern said, everybody's scared of everything. We're scared of the pushback we're going to get. We're scared of whether we're going to get reelected. We're scared of everything. What we're actually scared of is change. We're scared of change. What are we going to lose? And so I think we just start, run some numbers for us. And if we look at those numbers and go, oh yeah, we can't do that, then at least we've checked something off the list. But if we just keep sitting here and going in circles, we're never going to get anything done. We have to start with something. Are you going to disagree with me, please?
Come on, Stephanie, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, once again, I agree with Ms. Juby. And I think we need to decide, maybe we can do some straw polls associated with things. But, perhaps the first thing we need to decide is, are we going to do something about the 2025 budget or not? Just the first question.
And-
So how do other members on the committee feel about it? I know I believe it should be done. I know Mr. Chair believes it should not be done. So, so that's fine. What's the consensus of the committee? Should we begin with this 2025 budget?
Yes,
It-
Lewis
kind-
is a
it-
yes
Ms.
on
Lewis,
that.
what do you think?
Lewis is a yes. Let's
Anita.
look at it.
Yes, yes.
So we have Vern and Anita as 2025. We have Dale and me as 2026.
Sir Sanchez. Jared,
Mr. Chairman, I do think we should be looking at it this year and every year, really.
Well, there you go. There's three. That's the consensus.
Hey, we
well,
decided
We
something.
did. And we don't necessarily agree, but we decided it because that's what, if you're
Mhm.
going to turn it over to what consensus says, then that's consensus.
Mhm.
Although I can
well, we
mention
don't
that
have,
we don't, the two people that would be not saying 2025 are not here to vote.
yep, right.
So
And I think, Mr. Leonard and Mr. Surges should have an opportunity to.
well, I think they made it clear with their vote last year that they want to spend down all of the excess
I
reserves
agree.
before they look at this. So,
Historically, that's.
I mean, they could change. I don't know. I don't want to speak for them, but
They're on that side.
can,
Yeah.
can we run some numbers? Just run numbers before we determine whether it's this year or next year? Because if we run percentages and I don't know why we can't look at both years. I really don't. I mean, if we have, if the departments have already put their budgets in, I think asking them now because we chose to drag our feet because we didn't want to make difficult decisions, I think that's kind of a jerk move. However, if they haven't put it in, maybe we do run and say, hey, what would this look like for you? And if they come
Mhm.
back with, well, this year it's not going to work at all, but next year we could maybe get there. I mean, I recognize, yeah, we have a cliff. I get it. I'm not going to argue, Vern. I agree with you 100%. We shouldn't have been not capturing CPI. That's crazy. But we did, and we have to start where we are. And we're not 24 people that all agree on the same thing. So maybe if we have options, maybe that'll help us make decisions.
Well, one of the other things in my mind is we want to be fair to each department. I would hope we want to be fair. And that's a difficult decision to say, what should this department be and what should the next one be? And, I don't know, how do we come up with that?
Well, I think that goes to the strategic plan in terms of, I mean, if we were a business and you had different operating units and I mean, I'm comparing a government to a private sector company. It's obviously not apples to apples, but if you were in a private company and had 3 business units and they're all making a different product and some are good and some are not good, you would adjust accordingly. So a strategic plan, in theory, would assist the county in identifying where resources should be placed in a world where decisions need to be made.
Even in a business, the finance has their agenda. Marketing has their agenda. Manufacturing has their agenda. And they're all pushing, but there's one person that makes the decision. Which we don't have that one person. Mr.
And-
Tepe?
And just to interject, it's not an apple and an apple because you have shareholders and the shareholders demand a profit. So you always have to return a profit to a corporation. Our shareholders, if we want to use that metaphor, are the people who come to our meetings and who are participate in Kane County's resources. And if those resources are not provided for, we're discriminating against their ability to enjoy the county with their money that they have paid into the county. So if we, back to transportation, could we save money? Right now, we plow roads, I believe, at 2 inches with snow or with ice. But are we going to say that if we're going to say that we're going to wait until there's 4 inches of snow, how much money, I know, because you drive on the rural roads, but how much will that save? But theoretically, how much will that save? If we decide that we're going to test wells every other year instead of every year, we're providing the mandated service that well is required by state statute, that the health department is required to test. But if we say it's every other year, we're still obeying potentially state statute, but we're not providing the quality of service that Kane County has, I would hope, to grow to expect. But if this board, 24 members, decide that they don't want to increase revenue because they want to give shareholders what they consider a share value of 24, of keeping their property tax and all other taxes as low as possible, which is absolutely a responsible thing to do. But if it doesn't allow services to be provided, there's no other choice but to cut those services, to deny the shareholders the opportunity to drive on a road that has been plowed with 2 inches of snow rather than wait for 4 inches.
We haven't given our shareholders an opportunity to display their pleasure or displeasure. I think, the only way we're going to do that is come out for a referendum on something. And then they will know. Other than that, we listen to a few that come and speak the loudest. And that's not a representative part of our community.
And just to clarify from my head, the $6 million that we've been talking about would have included the suggestions from Mr. Tepe. So is it true that we're looking at, Kathy, $15 million potential deficit for next year?
For the general fund?
Yes, ma'am.
Most likely. I mean, our budget deficit this year was a little over $1 million. And then there was the adjustment at the end to move some ARPA interest earned over. And I was just looking at this yesterday. There's not as much ARPA interest earned, obviously, left over to move into the general fund because we've been spending down all of the ARPA money. So with all of the salary increases, you're probably, just for the general fund, you're probably looking at a deficit of about 15 million. We don't have all the numbers in yet, but probably close to that.
And how much is left in total in the reserve fund?
I don't have that number off the top of, as of today, I don't have that number
Is it
for you.
30 million?
No, there's, you mean in excess of the
Yes, yes,
30-day,
yes, yes,
of the 90-day reserve? It's probably around 30 million.
30 million. All right. So we may have enough.
We'd probably find more, but at least 30 million.
Mhm.
Mr.
Right.
Tepe.
All right, Mr. Chair, running off the effect that we had one point of agreement so far. Okay. That being the case, if we're going to say we're going to look at things in relationship to the 2025 budget, okay? My suggestion is we need to decide what numbers we're going to use. I think it would be a mistake to wait until everybody gives us their numbers, because their numbers are going to end up being a significant increase unless you've got those numbers coming in the next week or two.
We have some straggler departments out there, so we don't have everybody in yet. Everything was due May 31st, but we don't have everything yet.
But you're pretty close to having the numbers?
Pretty close. It's
Okay.
probably going to be another few weeks before we have everything.
Well,
We pretty much directed them as to what they should be doing.
My suggestion would be that we get those numbers as soon as possible, all right? And if not, some estimates associated with them. And particularly those numbers that are affected by, that would be affected by those funds that are using reserves. Okay? And that we begin to target what we think would be an appropriate budget for that group. Whether it be the sheriff or the state's attorney or whatever department it might be, that we actually come up with a targeted number associated with that, that we present that to the board. And at the same time, we present the board with the alternatives associated with how we could get additional revenue, regardless of how we may personally feel about those sources, okay? We still need to present it to the board as alternatives for them. So, and I think we can get that done if we work at it perhaps in the next month or so.
And we did, as part of this whole budget process, we did ask all the departments to give us a 2024 estimate. And we have most of that in. Again, we have a few stragglers out there, but we have most of that information as well.
But
We have that information.
But the numbers that I was working on, almost 2 months ago now, from Kathy were that we had a $11 million deficit for the 2025. Now it looks like it's 15 million.
It was 11 million for 2024.
Okay, I have that in 2025, but now we're probably, looking in my mind, what I see is 15 million, okay? And we need to decide if we're going to make a dent in that or not. I mean, in my mind, we're going to have to use some amount of reserves for the 2025 budget. Okay, I don't think there's any way around it. But at the same time, we need to present to the whole board with whatever logic we want to include, but we've got both alternatives for revenue as well as budget changes. And we're going to have to defend that because nobody's going to be happy about a budget cut. Nobody. So can we have some consensus on that and
And
perhaps
we're gonna
get started?
defend what we've told the departments that their cuts should be.
Dale, use your mic.
Oh, we're going to defend what we tell the departments, what their cuts should be.
Now we're going to present it to the board. Okay, and it's not going to be, these kinds of things are never going to be received well, but we need to do it in an effective manner, not in any way trying to be, vindictive or mean. Let's just present the logic that's there. And then we can begin to argue with the board. But if we can get this done in the next 30 days, I don't know, do you think that can happen, Kathy?
Yes.
Well,
And I'm willing to work on it as
Well-
much as you need.
well, here's the thing. We're talking about, your logic. I don't know if your logic is sound. But we're going to say to each department, okay, you're going to cut. Now they're going to tell us, okay, how they're going to cut. And from that, we have to extrapolate what services are they going to cut if they are going to cut services. They're going to cut employees. They're probably going to cut services, right? And that has to be part of this presentation that we make to the board.
Well,
I mean, it's
don't
more than just dollars. It's-
Well, I think we need to look at dollars because I think Ms. Juby will agree with me on this. We don't want to go micromanage these departments and tell them what to do, okay? And if we were to say to the state's attorney, wait a minute, we can't give you this amount. We have to, this is what we're allocating to you. I mean, there are so many new programs that the state's attorney's office has done that I think are highly beneficial for this county, that it's going to be really hard, to turn down all of these phenomenal programs that are making a difference to the people in the county. But at the same time, we've got to be fiscally responsible and start with this. And whether or not it gets approved by the board is not up to this committee, but it's up to us to present it as factually as we can.
I think that then this commitment from each department has to include the services, not just dollars.
Well, I disagree with that because that's telling them, I don't know if I'm hearing what you're saying, but I think I'm hearing it, but I don't know if that's what you're actually saying. I think what I'm hearing is that we determine how much money is going to come out of their budget. They figure out what that's going to look like and then come back to us with it. And then I don't know if we're going to meet then and talk about it and determine what we send forward. But then I think we have to go on the whole cause and effect thing. You know, we have to do something and it's going to affect other things. We don't necessarily know what those other things are going to be, right? It might be those great services that none of us want to cut, but we don't know until we ask the question. And so I think in the next couple meetings that we have, I think we may be painted as the bad guys, but I don't know that we're going to act on the information that we get back the way we think we're going to act on it now. We may decide when all this comes back and we actually have data instead of just our perception of what it's going to be, we may go, oh crap, we have to do this, this, and this, because this would be horrible if we lost these services. Or we may come back and say, wow, I didn't even know we offered that service. How bad is that if, you know, but that's, to me, that's not our job. Our job is to say, this is the percentage, and then you give us feedback. And we'll take that feedback and we'll have great discussions like we're having now. And we may not agree, we may agree, whatever. But right now, we're kind of being asked to make decisions on data that we don't have yet. And we're being asked to have a result of that on stuff that we don't know what the information is going to be. So we can't make a decision.
Well, once again, I essentially agree with you.
Stop agreeing with me, Vern.
We're doing good things here, okay? Once again, I essentially agree with you. The difference is that I believe it's within our charge to come back with, these are the numbers we feel are appropriate for this department, okay? We present that to the board, and then the individual committees on the board that are responsible for those departments or for those sections of our government, they're the ones that have to come back and say, wait a minute, we can do it this way, or we
Just wanna
can't do it
change the
that way.
order.
So I think we're saying the same
You just want
thing.
to change the order,
I
right? You want it to go to committee.
I
You want
want it to go to the
full
board,
for the percentage or the dollar amount,
right?
and then have it go to the
Then it's up to
departments
the,
and then the committee and then come back.
because the board could
Right.
easily tell us we're way off base.
Yes, I'm okay with that. That's not the way I would have done it, but yes, I'm okay. That makes sense to me.
Ms. Bates?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to say that in the middle of all this talk about budget cuts and service cuts, we're talking about the lives of our employees here. And I hope that we can make sure that we do this with compassion, with logic, and with good speed. And hopefully we won't be cutting our employees. Our employees are probably listening right this minute to, will we cut this or will we cut that? These are people's lives as well. So I'm just trying to remind us all that this goes beyond, snow plowing. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Bergman.
Madam Chair.
Ms. Bates, thank you for bringing that up because that was very much on my mind. Right now, we're looking for a new director of transportation, and that application has gone out. I'm just using that as a hypothetical example. To enter into such an important position, knowing that you're going to have potential reduction, and the county is fiscally unstable, may give pause. It may give pause to those employees who thinking, well, then maybe there's an opportunity someplace else. So there may be repercussion with this. It's necessary, absolutely necessary, absolutely no question. It has to get done. But there is going to be some fallback, and it's going to be coming through personnel. It has no choice because that is 70% of our budget is staffing.
Okay, well, What we need to do then, we need to come up with a method or a plan as to what we're going to tell each department as to what their cut is going to be. That not,
I don't necessarily agree with it. I don't think it's us to come up with a plan for the department. I think it's us to come up with a budget number for that department that we recommend to the board.
well, okay, a budget number, I don't care what,
Budget number.
a plan.
But it's a, you know, and we're probably gonna fight over that a little bit or something of that nature. You know, maybe Mr. Chair, you might want to appoint Ms. Juby and I to work with Kathy to come up with that, because we're doing a great job of agreeing so far. But I'd be happy to work on that in some detail.
Well, I think, you know, all the work will be,
I agree that work does go to Kathy. I think it's just up to us to determine what percentage we give her. And that's why I thought something neutral of however much percentage they get of the budget would be the percentage that they would have to reduce from the deficit. Because it's not asking them for a huge number. It's not saying they get $70 million, so they have to find 47% of 70 million. They need to find 47% of the 6 million or the 12 million. So I'm not suggesting, and I'm also not suggesting that we are going to approve necessarily what they come to with us, because like Mavis, I don't want to be like dropping people off and, you know, seeming really callous, but I'm trying to keep it as neutral as we can before we get data, and we can't get data without having the conversations. And if people are going to get upset with just the conversations, they have to understand we may not follow through with that. We may, as a group of 24, say, look, this isn't going to work. We need to pass a tax increase. Do I think that's going to happen? No. Do I wish it would happen? Yes. But I'm just saying that even if we come up with something, it's not the final thing. It's just a data point, and it may work and it may not. And we have to start somewhere. And it does fall on Kathy, because she's the one who's going to do all the numbers.
so what we're saying, we're gonna come up with a number and then we're gonna.
Please
present
use
that
the
to
microphone.
board, that this is our plan.
Dale, I can't hear you.
All right, we're gonna come up with these numbers for each department. We're gonna then present those numbers to the board. And then the board is going to either say yay or nay to presenting that, and this is the plan we want to take. And then it goes to the departments and they're gonna work on whatever they have to do to cut to that number. Is that the plan? Is that the way it looks?
Oh, yeah, and then I think if it then goes to the committee and the committee of 7 says, yeah, that we're not doing that, then we have justification of why we can't do that. I think that somebody mentioned if you start with 0 and you justify every dollar you spend, it's easier than if you start at 100 and you go down and justify. And so just because we're asking them to justify the money because we have identified that amount as a cut, doesn't mean it's going to make the cut to be cut. It just means that they have to hone their argument a little bit better, because they have to be able to convince us that if they can't be cut, we have to be able to raise revenue. And the only way we're going to convince people that we have to raise revenue is to have a compelling story with data that isn't fear mongering. And I think that's all I hear every time, is they just want us to look at it. And I think that if we tell people that they're going to end up having to realistically drive in 4 inches of snow, I think there's a whole bunch of people that would be like, yeah, we're not, no, nope, I'll pay a little bit more on my taxes because I'm not driving that.
It's a shame, but that's what this entire activity is.
Well, I think that's what we have to do. I think we have to justify what we do. And I think we can't take for granted, because, you know, you don't take for granted in your personal budget, but there's things you just don't live without in your personal budget. I mean, my animal budget is sacred in my house. Does it mean sometimes we eat not great food? Yeah. Yeah, because I have a high animal budget, but those are my choices.
There's also another choice. You can go out and find a second job.
I could,
Okay.
which I did.
That's the same as going out and asking for.
Exactly. But if you don't know the data,
Louis, your hand is raised.
Yes, it is. So, not to belabor this, but I think everything that Leslie has said is correct. I think Kathy needs to, when she gets those budgets in the next 2 to 3 weeks, that's point one, then she needs to take those budgets and say, we need to remove 6 million or 15 million, whatever that number is. And then she needs to bring them back to this committee and say, okay, if we want to do this, then based on the fact that the sheriff's budget is the highest, we need to ask the sheriff to take $4 million out of that budget. Just exactly the way Leslie said. Go down the line, this person has 40% of the budget, they need to remove 40% of that $6 million. She needs to give those numbers to us, and then we need to look at them, this committee right here, and say, yeah, that looks good, or that looks horrible, or we're idiots, or we're great. Then present it to the board, and then get it to the committees that oversee those departments. And it might look horrible, it might look good, but I can't sit here and really fathom in my mind what it's going to look like.
Well said.
All right, where are we?
Kathy, can you manage that?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we have most of the information. We have a few straggling departments. We should be getting that information in hopefully over the next week and a half,
Okay.
2 weeks.
And make sure I'm going to just throw, because we've been talking so much about different board expenses, because the board is 100% funded out of property tax, so the general fund. So make sure that that percentage cut also is put forward. It's fair on that budget line as well, because we're all in here in one. We're all here in one.
You're getting their numbers for this year's budget
For the 2025 budget.
Right.
now, but that's not including a cut of any nature.
No, we asked everyone to try to stick to 3% increase. Obviously, it's difficult in the contractual services line item because a lot of contractual services vendors they increase more than 3%. So I don't expect that we are going to be able to, I mean, there are departments that have tried really hard and have been able to hold their budgets low. There are others that haven't. It's all over the board. I think contractual services has driven a lot of the increase. I look at our own department. We're at the end of our 5-year audit contract, and we are going to be sending out a bid next week. I highly doubt that the firm that we hire next year is going to be only 3% higher than the bid we got 5 years ago. So, yeah.
Oh. Well, what you're getting is not really what we're asking. We want to get a number from you as to what a cut should be.
Right. So once everybody finishes, I'll know what
Okay.
what dollar amount of reserves
Okay,
is
Oh,
needed.
so you're waiting to figure out the reserve amount, whether it's 12 million or 6
No, no.
million or 18 million. That's what you're waiting for?
No, there are
No.
departments and offices that have not finished entering all of their contractual services, commodities, and capital.
Right,
line
but if they
items.
get 6% of the budget, then the number we're going to be asking them, from what I understand for consensus, is we want 6% of whatever the reserve amount is that we're going to, of the spending in excess of our reserves. So that's what I thought we were asking
Oh.
for,
Yeah.
not what what they're submitting to you. It's whatever percentage of the budget that they get, and then that's the percentage of whatever our deficit spending is that they need to identify as cuts.
Yeah, you're
Is that
saying
how
the
everyone
same-
else remembers?
You're saying, no, you're saying the same thing. She's just saying in order to be a little more accurate, she's going to wait until they send the budget in, which should be in the next couple of weeks.
No, that's not the same thing, though.
no,
No, because it doesn't matter what budget they send in. They can send in a budget that's 100% over what we gave them or 50% under. It's the percentage of the budget. It's a percentage of the general fund that they actually receive.
From last.
So it's not the same thing.
I'm not following.
Okay, so say we've decided that we're gonna be using $10 million of reserves.
And I don't know that yet.
No, I'm just
Okay.
saying that.
Right.
Say we decided we're gonna use $10 million of reserves. And there is a department that gets 2% of the general fund. So you need to figure out 2% of that $10 million, and that is the dollar amount that they're going to be asked to remove from their budget.
Right.
Okay, so when you're saying you're waiting for these people, you are saying that that is so you can determine how much reserve money we're actually going to be spending, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so okay, so that's where we determine whether it's 6 million, 10 million, 15 million. Okay. And do we have any idea when they will be getting those budgets into you?
That's what I was just saying. We, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. There are people right now who haven't submitted their budget, but their key people are unavailable. We're working with them.
What do you guesstimate our reserve use is going to be? I understand it's not going to be
15
accurate.
for the general fund, 15 million.
So let's use 15 million and let's not worry about waiting for the stragglers to come in because we don't have the luxury of waiting 4 weeks because we have a lot of things we have to do, especially if it's going to happen in this budget cycle. So let's hypothetically use the 15. If it turns out to not be 15, great. That's less money than they have to. But we have to do something and we can't keep waiting to do
I agree with
something.
that. We did have a budget calendar. Yes.
We can estimate what Thursday's gonna be.
Right. I mean, and if we're wrong because it's just an estimate anyway.
Well,
So
That's what a budget is. It's just an estimate.
Yes. And that is what I keep saying. It's just an estimate.
It's an estimate.
It's just.
So
an
let's
estimate.
estimate high. And why you're shaking your head?
no,
I would recommend the word conservative, not high. Better word.
We're estimating, we're not being conservative on what we're going to be using out of the reserves. I mean, we're going on the high side of what we think we're going to be using.
Which to me is conservative as versus optimistic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's fine. Tomato. I'm fine with that.
Bologna, bologna.
optimistically, we're not gonna need that much,
Hopefully we're not. But
but,
let's plan for it.
but conservative way is we do need. it.
Okay, so we'll just plan for the worst and hope for the best.
All right, this has been a good experience. Of course, we could, we're going through this exercise to convince the board and our constituents that there's a definite need for a change of some nature. And if we can prove that, yeah, we can cut back without not deleting those services, and that's one thing. The other thing is, though, we need to give our constituents an opportunity to, if we feel that we need an increase in our revenue and need their help in making it happen, then we need to present it to them. And that's where we get into the sales tax.
So maybe,
Early, we're a little early for that.
right, so I was gonna say, so maybe, I mean, this isn't gonna be a one and done discussion. And I think you're right. If you get buy-in, if you show people without trying to scare people, if you show them stuff and you let them come to the conclusion, they can either decide if this is something they support or not. And if it's something they support, then maybe they'll help us. And if it's something they won't support, they'll probably work against us. But that's how it works, that's how it is. So if we have a better story, if we can sell with our facts,
Isn't that
No,
what we're trying to build?
that's what we're trying to do.
Trying to build a better story. We're trying to build confidence in
An-
what we're saying.
An accurate story, and we don't know until we get the data.
Okay,
I have
Madam
one,
Chair.
one follow-up question. This sounds fantastic. Thank you all. But we have board members who are reticent to move forward with any kind of increase in revenue. until the general, or until the reserve fund, the fund balance is drawn down. But what we're doing right now is working within the means of the general fund. That's what our goal is. So we don't have to deplete the reserve fund. This,
Building a story.
yeah, I know what we're doing. I know what we're doing. But meanwhile, that reserve fund, let's say that cut is accurate and the board approves it and everyone is compliant. And out of the $15 million that we may be bringing in from reserves, we only need to bring $6 million down or $7 million down. So we've got more money saved back in there. We don't have to take the whole 15. Is there going to be pushback then to say that, all right, we're not going to need sales tax, et cetera, because we still have money in the reserve fund? Or can that reserve fund be used and pushed aside to where I believe it belongs in capital? We can move it to capital, can we
sure.
not?
Yeah, I mean, our capital projects fund historically over the years has been funded with money from the general fund when the general fund has had more revenues than expenses. Right now, our general fund is not having more revenues than expenses, so there's really nothing to fund the capital projects fund with.
And do we, I assume from what I'm hearing constantly is that we need money in the capital fund for building maintenance and improvements.
Well, there's requests in all the funds in the county. Again, our health department fund, so we talk about our general fund using about 10% of its, 10% of the expenses in the general fund are funded with reserves. Over 25% of the health department's expenses are funded with the reserves that are in the health department fund. So the general fund is not the only fund that is using reserves. I want to keep saying that over and over again. But there's needs in every fund. There's capital needs, there's health department needs, it's not just, it's.
What you're really saying is that if the health department was not using their funds, they'd be coming to the county for the general funds to cover those expenses.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that what the question was, that typically excess money goes to capital. And
Okay.
then I made the point that we can't fund the capital projects fund right now because it has historically been funded with monies from the general fund. And then I just wanted to make the point again, because there is a focus on the general fund, and I think there should be because most of the employees in the county are budgeted out of that fund. But there are other funds in the county that are running on a deficit, not just the general fund.
So I have a clarification, because some of I think what you're calling deficit spending is them deliberately spending down a reserve in excess of what they're supposed to have.
So what I'm talking about is a budget is put together and there are more expenses for a particular year than incoming revenues, new revenues to support it. So they need to dip into their reserves to pay.
Aren't a lot of the health department things funded from grants, and they get a small percentage from us? So if they're dipping into their reserves, they're dipping into their grant money.
No, the grant money would be shown as new revenue money. It's not in the.
So
It's not
you're
the
saying
reserves.
that they're operating, when you take into consideration their grant money and you take into consideration the $2 million that they get from us, they're still operating.
They don't get any transfers from the general fund.
Don't they get $2 million from what they levy? They get $2 million.
They have they have
Right.
property tax revenue.
Right. So they get that. And then everything else they have is grant funding, correct?
Plus also they get about $1.5 million in fees that they collect on the
Right.
environmental.
So when they are running deficit spending, they're running deficit spending out of money that they have brought in.
Built up,
So we're
the health,
talking about apples and oranges, and we need to stop talking about their fund because that's not where our problem is.
well, the health department fund is in the same situation that the general fund is, in that during the COVID years, the health department fund received a significant amount of both CARES Act and ARPA Act money and built up a huge reserve. It basically, essentially, the expenses in the health department are salaries and mostly salaries and then contractual services.
Right, but they're all things that are not dependent on the money that we give them out of the general fund. because
They
we
don't
give
receive
them-
any money from the general fund.
That's my point. So let's take them out of this discussion because when they run out of money, they will not have programs. He goes out when he finds a program and he gets money for it. And that's how he expands. And I think that right now, throwing that into this whole mix, it's like IMRF. We have to pay IMRF. We don't have a choice. I mean, we have to pay
Correct.
FICA. We don't have a choice about that. So to think that we would be cutting those departments because those are running in deficit is kind of confusing everything. Because we can't cut those. We're statutorily required to pay that. So we have to come up with the money on that. So that's not something we can say, well, let's take 1% out of that because we can't. So let's get them off the table because it's just, right, Vern? Isn't it just like confusing? I mean, you're nodding your head. Yes, I could use some help here.
I agree with you. And, you know, I think we've made some major directional decisions as to how we're going to go. And as we bring in other things, it begins to detract from where we're going. I don't think this is the time for us to start talking about sales tax. I'm sorry, I just don't think that's the time for us to start talking about that. We've got, I think, an agreement on the narrow things that we want to accomplish, and I'm ready to go home.
I like that. All right, anything else? So we're looking for the
Next meeting.
budget numbers.
Meeting.
Pardon?
When's the next meeting?
Yeah, I think,
Oh,
When is
that's
the next
good.
meeting?
I think
Good.
we should all call Kathy every day.
We should make plans for the next meeting.
Are we doing a separate meeting aside from our finance? I see
We may not
Savannah
have-
nodding her head. I please hope we are because I would hate, oh, you're not, you're just nodding your head into like internal music? Okay, because I think that this earned its own carved out time. I would, however, like us to pick it now because this was the one day I couldn't make it and I had to cancel and rearrange everything. And I really don't want to do that again for the next meeting because I might not be able to.
You
So,
think we need and
well, she's gonna have to come back with
same group,
numbers.
same group of people.
Yeah, but the finance packet is due next
Oh, okay.
Thursday. I
Yeah.
won't have anything.
You're right.
Would 2 weeks from now for a date be appropriate?
Well, 2 weeks from now is the same day as the finance committee meeting.
Well, I thought that was a week from now.
No, but everything has to be in for the board meeting, for the packet by next Thursday. So there's no way I will have all the information by
answer is
next
no.
Thursday. So, yeah.
Then what would be the earliest date that you think would be appropriate?
Probably in July.
Okay, okay, I mean,
So like, are we looking at like the week of the 8th?
Or do you want to do it July 2nd or 3rd?
How about the third after exec? Oh, no, we got the other exec too.
Yeah, let's,
July,
That's up
you're
to-
right. July 3rd is after exec.
July 3rd is what?
Executive meets at 9 o'clock, so that meeting should be over, let's say hypothetically at 11:30.
Oh, wait, we have,
We have
Forest
forest
Reserve
reserve.
exec that day also,
Yeah.
All right.
so that won't work. How about
What's
Tuesday?
wrong
the
with July
2nd?
2nd?
No, I can't do
July.
July 2nd.
Okay.
Sorry.
July 1st, July 5th?
No.
I can do July 1st.
We got nothing going on the fourth, the fifth.
The first is empty. There's no meetings.
Is the
scheduled.
afternoon okay?
Afternoon is great for me.
And
Yeah, works for
Mr.
me.
Chair, can we agree to 2 o'clock on July the 1st?
Yep, that's fine.
What was that date?
July
July
1,
1st,
July 1.
Monday?
It's a Monday.
Mm-hmm.
Fine by me.
Anita, does that work for you?
That works perfect.
And what time did you say, Vern?
2.
2 o'clock,
Jarrett, how about you?
1 o'clock? I don't know.
2 o'clock, the later is better
Two
for me.
o'clock on Monday, January 1st,
Is
January,
Jarrett there
July,
still?
July.
July 1st,
Is Jarrett still there?
my 91st birthday.
Is,
Yes, Jared is still there.
Jarrett, does that work? July 1st at 2 o'clock? Jarrett? It's like when you go to the bathroom, you get volunteered for stuff.
Yeah.
Can
Because
I,
he's
can I,
still online.
I just want to ask one more question, because it would be easier for me, for the departments who are being stragglers, if we can't get them to give us the information,
Go
To
with last
just-
year's numbers.
to just put it, yeah, I was going to say last year's numbers.
Yeah, your best guess. Your
Mhm.
best guess. How's that?
Right.
Okay? July 1st?
I'm sorry, best guess plus 3%. Best guess plus, yeah, or you just want to do what they had
Yeah.
before?
But if
They
that
had
doesn't
one.
matter, what they ask for doesn't matter. What they ask for is totally different than
Oh,
what we're
I-
asking them to
Mhm.
cut.
Well, no,
Yeah,
but it was just because Kathleen mentioned.
right, but it doesn't matter.
3% increase.
It doesn't
Well,
matter.
if the fund balance number, which is going to be the factor that we use to determine how much is cut, is based on the amount of expenditures that are budgeted, then it does matter how much
Right,
is
but we
budgeted.
were gonna go conservatively high, remember? We were gonna, because if we didn't have everyone singing there, we were going to assume that we were taking 15 million out of reserves, out
Oh.
of the excess reserves.
Right, but if I'm a department and I
Then you
have
should have
done-
gotten it
and I've
ahead
done
of
my,
time.
and I've done my job and I've submitted the budget on time and I have an increase of, let's say, 3 or 4%, and I'm a department who hasn't submitted their budget data, and the finance director just takes last year's budget, their budget is lower, so they're going to be cut less.
No, their budget has nothing to do with it. It's the amount that they get. So if,
But the amount that they get is based on their expenses.
okay,
I'd-
we have to pick something,
I'd,
Yeah.
I'd apply a factor,
right?
Apply a factor
apply a factor.
like 3%, because that's what we gave. That was the budget guidance.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay, until further notice, our meeting is going to be July 1st, 2 o'clock.
Good job. Good job, Dale. Well done.
Okay.
Motion for adjournment.
So moved.
All those say favors, say aye, and aye. Out of here.
Aye. Have a pleasant afternoon, everyone.